welcome to another episode of Brave New Leaders, where we discuss what CEOs need to know about strategy. If this is the first time you're joining us, my name is Marc Sniukas. I host these LinkedIn Lives and a podcast and a couple of YouTube videos on this question of what CEOs need to know about making better strategy. And today I'm joined by Peter Compo, and we're going to discuss Peter's excellent book around Emergent strategy, or the emergent approach to strategy. So if you don't know the book yet, if you're interested, you can check it out here on emergentapproach.com. Hi, Peter. Thanks for joining us.
Hello. Nice to be here. And of course, can I say Amazon.com, of course, for
yes, of course.
Right. The book.
We can share the link in on the LinkedIn afterwards to get the book directly. So, Peter, why don't we start with you just telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you came to write the book, or how you started out with strategy in the first place?
Sure. It's a long story, and I'll make it short. I'd always been interested in innovation, creativity. I grew up in a musical family, and I was always intrigued by how composition occurred and how musicians did what they did. And then I started studying science, and my formal training is, my doctorate is in engineering. And I began to see the same patterns and interesting ways that creativity worked there, and thought that the arts and sciences seem very similar. And I came early on to a view that creativity and innovation are adaptive processes. And I'm not the first to have done that, but I got it early. And then when I went into the workplace, I went to join EI DuPont here in Wilmington, Delaware, where I am. At the time, it was the 7th largest company in the Fortune 500. Great company. 200 years. They were approaching their 200th anniversary when I joined, and many people know some of their fantastic and legendary products, Kevlar and nylon and refrigerants and automotive paint and Tyvek and so forth and so on.
Right.
But when I got there, I was somewhat surprised by the way strategy was done. And DuPont was not alone at all. The consultants that came in, and there were many, seemed to be in the same place. And I didn't see the adaptive innovation aspect of it that I had seen in science and music. And over the years, I took notes. I thought about it. I read. I tried to compare changes in a corporation to changes in science and in evolution and biological evolution. And over the years, I started formulating these ideas. I left the company after 25 years to work full-time on writing and researching. And eventually, this book emerged. It wasn't planned this way, just like everybody else. It wasn't planned exactly, but this is the way it came out. In my career there, though, I had a good view of the process. I worked at low and high levels. I worked in ventures. I worked in commodity businesses. I worked in operations and marketing and business in general, and ran businesses. So I felt like I had a good view of how the corporation works, and tried to imbue all of that I could into this book.
Great, excellent. So, I mean, how would you describe when you joined DuPont the traditional way of how strategy was done at DuPont? How would you describe that?
Well, and again, I don't want to single out DuPont at all.
Right.
But
because
that just happens to be where I was, right? So I think, and this is becoming more and more known to be a problem. High-minded visions and missions and big goals, and then lists after list after list of sub-goals, plans, metrics, and now today pillars and values, and I think in many ways, it was the lists that got me the most and that made me realize that this is not strategy.
Okay.
And so I think big goals followed by lists,
Yeah.
no trade-offs, no statements that brought everything together. In many ways, it followed what people teach sometimes is the whole idea of strategy themes. Okay, we want to grow this company. All right, operations, here's your job. Increase production and reduce costs. And marketing, here's your job. Make better products and sell them better. And very little interaction between the
Right.
organizations.
Yeah, so, and yet you're right. I mean, we're not singling out DuPont. I see these kind of things all the time where you have 200 PowerPoint slides, right? 100 is some kind of analysis, and then you have a long list of even some who manage to kind of define the challenges. And I think we're gonna talk about that. But then again, it's like a long list of challenges and a long list of things for each challenge that need to be happening to hopefully solve the challenge. But there's no kind of coherence and no guiding principles or whatever behind all these different things. So I mean, we talk about emergent strategy, but let's maybe start with, so what is your definition of strategy?
My definition of strategy is a strategy is a central rule designed to, and I use the word bust, designed to bust the bottleneck to achieving the overall aspiration of whichever part of the organization you're looking at. So if it's the CEO's strategy, it's the whole corporation. If it's a product manager's strategy, it's whatever that product manager's scope of responsibility is. And I want to immediately say that one thing this definition makes clear is that there's a difference between a strategy and a strategic framework, or what's commonly called a strategic plan. So a strategic plan has it all. It has the aspiration, it has plans, it has sub-goals, it has metrics, it has a diagnosis, right? And projections and propositions and scenarios. It's a whole collection of management tools to try to bring a system from one place to another. But in my experience, the one thing usually missing from a strategic plan is a strategy, is the central policy, the central rule that brings coherence to it all. Now, there's other people that have moved in this direction. I think Rummelt is, when he talks about his crux, it's really about what's in the way. What do you have to solve? What do you have to get past to reach that aspiration? And he even teaches, don't even be so set on what your aspiration is, your specific goals. Think about the whole system. Saul and Eichert and others have talked about strategy as rules to bust bottlenecks, and you'll find some people who've been in this direction. But we have to make a clear distinction between a strategy and a strategic plan, or a strategy plan, strategy framework.
Yeah, I like that. So I also tend to think about strategy as, so I call it the response to the challenge that is keeping you from reaching your ambitions or aspirations. So I think it's very very aligned, and it's kind of like, I've been a consultant for 20 years, and it was always, clients always came, or 9 out of 10 clients, they come because they have a challenge they want to solve, right? So we're not growing in North America, or what are we going to do about competition in China? So it was always very, very challenge focused, I would say, and very seldom you might have occasionally somebody say, I'm thinking about the long-term vision of my company, and that's what they meant by strategy. But usually in practice, I would say in real life, it is about solving that particular challenge. So I mean, we talked about strategy, and I mean, your book is called Emergent Strategy. So what is it about emergent strategy, or what is your definition of emergent strategy? What's maybe the difference between strategy and emergent strategy?
Well, actually, you're absolutely right about the emergent part, but it's the emergent approach to strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a tricky subject that somehow I think has been confused. And it goes back to Mintzberg, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who did a great service, I think, to the strategy world by saying, "Hey, will
We'll
you
talk
guys
about that.
stop imagining that these 6-step process recipes of planning the future actually works," right? And
Mhm,
he famously, talked about strategic planning was an oxymoron.
mhm.
He
Yeah,
he ended up saying it, but I think he kind of set us off in a little bit of a funny direction. He said there's deliberate strategy and emergent strategy, and my argument is that all strategy is both emergent and deliberate, and
mhm,
that the difference isn't emergence or deliberate. The difference is the degree of constraint you
mhm,
impose on your
mhm,
on the system, on the organization, and in the overall strategy plan. Um, if you are pretty sure, if you really have a lot of confidence that there's relatively low uncertainty to achieving what you've got to achieve, you wouldn't leave a lot of uh, diversity in the strategy. You wouldn't
mhm.
leave a lot of optionality in it, right? You want to focus everybody on that. That doesn't mean that you're going to get the result you want. The result still has to emerge. All strategy is by definition deliberate in that you have to define it before you start taking action. Or
Or at least the intention, right? Otherwise, there's no action.
what would be the meaning of a strategy if you didn't need to define it
Mhm.
before the organization starts walking down the road?
Yeah.
So all strategy is deliberate in the sense that you have to define it ahead of time. All strategy is emergent, is that you cannot know exactly what the outcome is going to be.
Mhm.
What you can say is we have more confidence or less confidence on the certainty, and we'll reduce the amount of optionality when we're more certain and increase the amount of optionality or experimentation in the
Mhm.
case that we're not so sure.
Yeah. So that means for you, it's also emergent strategy. It's a lot about having these different options. So lots of different experiments. Or
I think that can be the case, but I think part of the problem here, I think I screwed up. I think I think I mistitled my book.
okay, what would be a different title?
I
Or
I well, I it's too late now, so I don't even think about it. But here's what's wrong with it. What's wrong with it is that it implies that what I'm suggesting is just for what people think of as this emergent view of the world of
Mhm.
strategy, where you're just going to run experiments and
Okay, yeah.
everybody's going to go out and do, you know, and it's not. What I
Yeah.
really meant is that all strategy is adaptive and
Mhm.
emergent. All innovation is adaptive and emergent.
Mhm.
It depends on a matter of degree. So,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I named it wrongly,
Okay.
and now I'm paying the price. But it opens up some good discussion.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. Yeah. Again, yeah, I think that I'm also there was always a deliberate, you always look at it deliberately, and then you take some action, and then part of it emerges, and that's where I see the big difference to what people try to do with strategic planning is kind of like define everything for the next 3 years up front, right? And not let that emerge, or not, yeah, recognize or not be aware that that emergent part is gonna happen. The other thing is that, and I talk frequently about a couple of case studies that I wrote about, is where you have a goal and you have a challenge to overcome, and then you start doing, right? And then the emergent part is that you do something, you get a response, you get feedback, what is working, what is not working, you learn new things, you get new questions that you need to think about in the next kind of iteration, and then the answers to these questions, they emerge as you're doing. So uh, sometimes it might be paradox, but you need to act in order to know what you need to do next, right? Instead of trying to plan for everything up front.
Well, I think that's right on. But tell me this: show me an innovative situation. Show me a business that grew without learning as they went.
Right.
Show me $1 billion business that was planned. Show me a great new product that people saw everything right from the beginning, laid it out, and then everybody went out and just did their jobs. I don't think it happens that way. It happens more or less that way at times, but all innovation and change and growth is adaptive and learning as you go. All you're trying to do with a strategy is give some form to how you do that. And when you have multifaceted organizations spread out around the world or even spread out around a country, how will everybody work together? It's funny. I saw someone describe deliberate strategy as one where there's data and thinking and planning and design, and that an emergent strategy is where everybody just it almost came down to like just does whatever they want.
Yeah.
And I would say, a less constrained situation probably needs even more planning, more design than one where you're pretty sure about what you have to do. What defines a good experiment? What defines, what defines a good excursion into a place you didn't think you were supposed to go in the first place? Does everybody just do whatever they want? How can it be?
Right. Yeah, a clear misunderstanding of what deliberate and emergent actually mean, right? Now, you mentioned change and innovation a couple of times, and also in the book, so you talk about strategy, you talk about change and innovation, and sometimes also two questions. So first is, so what is the relationship you see between these two? And sometimes how do they relate to each other? And sometimes I had the impression that I was not quite clear, or I had the impression that you're using change and innovation and strategy interchangeably as concept, which, as I'm listening to you, it's probably not the case of my misunderstanding, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
So I guess two comments. I use change and innovation together, those two terms. I don't know exactly why. I somehow feel that if I just say innovation, people won't think that strategy applies to what they would consider more mundane changes or improvements they have to make. And so I wanted to cover all the bases. But for either one, for any change, for anything that you want to change a system, an organization, a technology, a marketing plan, you need to innovate in some way. You need to change something. And strategy and the rest of the strategic plan are for enabling that, are for giving guidance, for raising the probability of how you can make the change that you think you want. By the way, you don't always, you might find out it's not the change you wanted, but whatever you think it is. So does that make clear that to change a system, a strategy, and its strategic plan with the other dimensions, including metrics and plans and diagnosis and all these things, is a management toolkit. It's a management way of giving form to how an organization will work together to try to achieve an ambition.
Okay, so we had a discussion on LinkedIn, and I shared your killer problems, and I said it's killer problems to strategy, and you kind of corrected me saying, no, it's killer problems to change and innovation. Well, does it actually make a difference? I think if you implement your strategy, the killer problems, or if you have a strategy, or if you're thinking about strategy and that strategic plan and everything, I guess the killer problems still apply to those, no? Especially if you have a plan, because lots of them are, let's maybe quickly for our listeners. So the first killer is the sheer amount of decisions you have to take to get somewhere, right? The second killer problem was the time lag between decisions, actions, and then actually the results you will see. The third one was around the uncontrollable influences and unforeseeable and plannable influences that you have. And the last one was about, I like that best actually, the what matters most is least actionable, right? And so how does that apply to change and innovation and not to strategy, if I may ask?
Okay.
Okay.
No, this is good, and I'm really glad you raised this up. So the what I call the killer problems of change and innovation are actually several, and you listed them perfectly, are several observations that come from a model of change and innovation from complex adaptive systems.
Mhm.
And actually, my definition of strategy was derived from a very simple influence diagram model of change and innovation in complex adaptive systems.
Mhm.
And the five items that you just mentioned were observations about when you create an aspiration, doesn't
Mhm.
matter what it is, improve a factory, grow in a market, change the culture of an organization, you name it. And of course, outside business, just the same, you name it. Win a military victory, I don't know.
Mhm.
Write a great piece of music. When you set an aspiration and then work backwards, the number of choices and decisions you need to make grow exponentially.
Mhm.
And they grow exponentially as you work backwards to choices you actually can make. So in
Mhm.
music, if you want to write a great piece of music, you don't have the right to just boom, go write a great piece of music, get at the piano and start, doing it. No, you can choose to write down notes. You can
Mhm.
choose what note to put when, by what instrument, and how long it lasts, and how loud and soft it should be played. But those choices don't really matter unless they add up to a great piece of music.
Mhm.
You want to
Which
grow?
is something you can't control whether they're gonna add up to a
Well,
great piece of music, right?
hold that thought. So
Yeah.
if you want to grow in a new region, you can talk about all the things you need to do about supply, quality,
Mhm.
product design, local presence, advertising, branding, name it. All
All
those
the choices we have to make when it
um,
comes to strategy, right?
almost countless choices, right, that you need to make. And they all have to add up to an overall success. Um, the problem is the choices themselves don't matter, but those
Mhm.
are the only things you can actually do. The only thing that matters is getting the result that you really care about, right?
Mhm.
So that's where it came up that the things that are most actionable are the least important. The thing
Mhm.
that's most important is not actionable. And this actually goes back to complex adaptive systems and how you can change a system. You can't change it directly. And
Mhm.
so the killer problems are for those observations that
Yeah.
make it so hard to do this.
Yeah.
Okay. The strategy and all the other dimensions of a strategic plan are tools to try to fight these problems.
Okay. Good. Yeah.
And so a strategy
Yeah.
has some requirements on it, has to give real time guidance, meaning you can't have a strategy that doesn't tell you what to do now in
Mhm.
order to achieve a goal, maybe in 3 years, right?
Right.
And other requirements. The strategy has to unify all those decisions. The
Mhm.
strategy has to be a free choice, meaning you can't just choose to grow. You can't just choose to write a great piece of music. Name any aspiration, we'd say the same thing.
Mhm.
So I'm sorry, a little long-winded answer.
Oh,
The,
no worries.
the killer problems are the conclusions about what's in the way in general to make change, to innovate, to achieve an aspiration.
Mhm.
Strategy and the other elements of a strategic plan are for attacking those
Those
problems.
two approach. Okay. Right. Now, you mentioned free choice, and I had a little bit the impression that sometimes you also use it as a criteria to elevate whether to evaluate whether actually something is a strategy or not. It has to have that real-time guidance, unify, and the free choice. So can you talk a little bit more about the free choice? I think it's quite abstract, maybe to say to grow is not a free choice. Right?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and you're absolutely right that the 5 disqualifiers that you also put up a post on are ways to test if free choice, unify, and real-time guidance are actually in place. But you said it. It's not a free choice to grow. It's not a well, okay. It's a free choice to grow if you're willing to sacrifice everything else, right? How many times has a CEO told a division to grow and they destroyed their profitability doing it, right?
Well, there's always a trade-off, right?
There's always a trade-off. So, um, so free choice is a very tricky but important concept. It means that you cannot choose an aspiration directly. You cannot just choose to grow. You cannot just set a goal and then make it happen.
But you can choose make the choices that will hopefully influence that
But
growth aspiration and get you there.
absolutely. But there's so many, and you don't know whether you've made the right choice until the future to see whether it comes out the way you'd hoped. And that's where the diagnosis comes in, and that's where strategy comes in, and that's where what's the bottleneck to achieving that aspiration becomes the key to the strategy design. How do you bring all of those choices together in a way that they attack the bottleneck that's in the way?
So, I mean, so thinking about working with executives, there is often that fear of making the wrong choices, right? So, and we have a little bit of the paradox. It's you can't know until you actually start acting on them. Right? On the other hand, they want to cover their asses by having all that analysis and data and stuff, so that hopefully they make the right choices. Do you have any? I don't know. What would you tell these executives, or how can they mitigate that? Or solve that tension between not knowing until you do, but wanting to know before you actually do something.
I have nothing against data. I have nothing against analysis. In
But
fact,
there is no data of the future, right? So that's a challenge here.
yes, I tend to say that there is no data of the future. But no, your question is important. I think the fastest way to improve is to eliminate the lists. And you started saying it there. It's frightening to go into a new area, right? And try to create something new. What do the lists do? The lists give people a false sense of security because they
Absolutely.
write down every possible thing that might be important. Who can argue? Look, it's all on the list. My board. Well, shoot, look, I had a list of 35 things here, 35 priorities that had to get done. Well, how come it didn't work? Well, I don't know. Look, it was on the list. You know, uh, we used to joke around. Um, Lists enable this also. They enable everybody to come in, and as long as they get their bullet point on the list, right, they can go back to doing what they were doing before because they feel like they were heard. Lists don't force trade-offs. They don't force integration between the organizational functions. So I would say the number one thing that can be done is stop the lists, just get rid of them, and then go to what I call the triad. And it's very connected to Rummelt's crux. Put the aspiration. It doesn't have to be firm. It's your initial belief about the aspiration. And you talked about many in a few minutes ago. I'm having a problem here. I have a desire here. What is it? Then what are possible bottlenecks to that aspiration? And then what are possible strategy policy rules, central rules that would attack that bottleneck? And what I call this the aspiration bottleneck strategy triad, forced to keep it on one page
Right.
and work it. and suffer with it and debate it. Go out and get data to prove a point or disprove a point. Get all the voices that are needed into that discussion. Don't let it get big, and don't allow yourself to make lists. I think that's the first thing you can do to
Right.
start moving in a different way of doing strategy that is more meaningful.
Definitely. Yeah. And then people are always surprised when you show them that a strategy can actually fit on one page, or a central rule. The strategy can be just a sentence, right? And it doesn't need all the planning and the forecast and the stuff. So looking at a couple of questions from
I'm having
our
a little trouble with my headphones here. Give me one sec if you wouldn't
yeah,
mind.
no worries, no worries. So just looking at the questions, talking about lists. So there were a couple of questions actually here about lists. So Matt Simmons, for example, asked about this idea of avoiding lists. But what about if those lists are aligned to a coherent, integrated strategy?
Great. I'm not against lists of plans.
Right.
I'm not against lists of not too many, but metrics. And it's exactly as the person who gave the question said. Once you have a diagnosis,
Right.
once you understand the core of the issue, the crux of the issue, then you can start designing lists of plans and action items that you know have to be done.
But they need to be aligned on that one thing and not.
They need to be tested against the triad, the big understanding. Usually it goes the other way, though. We start with the lists and then we get to the triad. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you probably also saw the Roger Martin video. A plan is not a strategy. We're just going around, right? And some people also misunderstand that a strategy doesn't need a plan, which is two different things, right?
Absolutely. And, plans are very important for simulating the future in a sense. They're feed forward concepts, right? Plans saying that I think if we do this by this date and in this way, it will help us lead to our overall objective.
Right.
Plans are feed forward, whereas metrics are feedback, right? As you walk down the road, metrics tell you whether, giving you information about what you're doing. But plans are feed forward. So plans are very important, but they come later.
Yeah, I also think, once we go into the execution, strategy is what you're then actually doing, and you need to plan also there to see whether, in terms of the feed forward, are we actually doing what we said we're going to do, right? Because otherwise, you don't need to look at the results if the input instead of the activities doesn't match what we had in mind in the first place, right? We've got a couple other questions here. There's one from Paul around, if your vision is clear and your mission understood by your staff, do you need a thought out strategy or a set of possible routes you could take? So I guess it's do you need one strategy, or do you just need a couple of well, I guess the question is, if you have a vision, do you need a strategy at all, first of all? And then does it need one way, or can it be just possible options to get to that vision?
I think for every system, so if you want to just say a business, let's just say an entire business. I think an entire business at the highest level has only one strategy. You can't follow two strategies at the same time, or three. You can only follow one strategy at a time. If you have a vision, let's give an example. Your vision is to grow in a new market or in a new region. Just make it up. Or you call that your mission, call it your vision, doesn't matter. And I don't think you always need a vision, mission, and specific goals, but
right.
pick whatever you think captures your aspiration. Let's say your aspiration is to grow in a new market or a new region. I think there can only be one strategy for doing that, and it depends on what's the bottleneck to doing it. So if the bottleneck to growing in that region is you have no local presence, your strategy would be different than if you don't have the right products. For example, what if your products are over designed for that new region and the customers there don't want to pay for that kind of quality or that kind of performance? Your strategy may have to involve defeaturing products or finding a way to cut the price of the products without contaminating your existing market. It would be a completely different strategy than if it was a matter of local presence. Local presence strategy might have to revolve around a JV or a partnership of some type or hiring a bunch of new people. So I think there's only one strategy per overall system or aspiration, and that strategy depends on what's in the way of that aspiration.
But also, I mean, taking your example, the strategy can evolve, right? If you say, well, we want to enter a new region, we don't have the local presence and we don't have the product, you make a decision. What's the first move, right? Do we develop the product or do we establish some kind of presence? And then the first challenge might be the presence. And once, let's say 12, 18 months it takes to have the presence, and then you take the next step, or the next strategy then is addressing the next problem, which might be developing or adapting the product to the local market needs or customer behavior.
That's a very important point. This definition of strategy means that strategy changes whenever the bottleneck changes.
Right.
If you've busted a bottleneck around the product, for example, if that was your problem area, that you don't have the right product line or you have to defeature or whatever that change might be, if you've achieved that, now maybe marketing becomes your bottleneck. Maybe now local presence, maybe now supply chain. Whatever is in the way has to be the focus of the strategy. Your vision may stay the same, your mission may stay the same for years, and your strategy is constantly changing to address what's keeping you from that mission.
I think that's an important point and a major challenge for many people who think that, strategy has to be that long-term kind of plan, right? And we discussed this before. If your ambition is to enter a new market in the next 12 months, then the horizon of your strategy is 12 months and not 10 years. Right?
Absolutely. I think this is, and I go into in chapter 1 a discussion of many definitions of strategy that I think all say something true, but are not useful as definitions of strategy. One of them is that strategy is whatever's long true, not to mention that you said it just before, the horizon of the strategy is given by the horizon of the aspiration.
Right.
And, too often we forget your strategy has to tell you what to do next Tuesday, not just what looks like something in 3 years. And I'm not saying that long-term planning isn't valuable. Maybe looking out 10, 15 years is a great exercise and important, but that doesn't define your strategy. No.
Yeah, so so John Hagel talks about zooming out and zooming in. So zooming out kind of in the future, maybe 5, 10 years, looking at where do you think the market is going to be and what role your company wants to play, but then zooming back into, so what does that mean for the next 12 months, right? If you want to get there, what is the new challenge or the first challenge we need to solve? And then once you solve that challenge, as you said, the next one is probably going to emerge. You also have to deal with that one.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a technique. That's a technique of exploration and of strategy designing, right? But it doesn't mean that a strategy is your 10-year plan and then we put that on the shelf, or 5-year plan, and then we put that on the shelf and go back to what we were doing for next Tuesday,
Cool, good. Just looking at the questions, there were a couple of questions around the role of innovation in the development of adaptive and emergent strategy. I guess, to me, it's really about how are you going to solve the challenge, and that could be in an innovative way.
Well, again, and maybe the question maybe there could be a little more clarity on the question. All change, everything that a leader wants to do, and that's from a CEO down to a product manager, down to a shop floor manager, whatever you are, and every function in an organization needs a strategy for solving their bottlenecks, to their aspirations. I think this is something we kind of use the word innovation. We pigeonhole it for big things, great things. Whereas just think that every bottleneck that has to be gotten over, every problem, everything that you do to make your system more efficient, better, that it produces something new, that's an innovation. That requires an innovation, and that requires some kind of system, some kind of approach that would enable you to raise the probability of doing that. And a strategy and the rest of the strategic plan, I call a strategy framework, is just a tool, is just a way to order your thinking, to guide your actions in a way that help you
How to do that? Yeah.
achieve that. I think we use innovation too restrictedly. Is that a word? I don't know. I just innovated a word. We use it for
Yeah, the big stuff now.
and this I think Porter kind of set us a little bit on this direction, and calling strategy the opposite of operational excellence. Well, I don't know anybody on this call who's ever tried to improve a factory, for example, and if you don't think that that requires innovation and strategy, then I don't think you've ever worked in a factory.
Yeah.
We
actually had just a question about that. So Ivan asked about, so given the distinction between operational effectiveness and strategy, how would you advise a company to balance the two in order to achieve sustainable profitability?
Yeah, well,
or kind of enhance operational effectiveness while also strengthening the strategic position in the market.
Yeah, here's where Porter kind of led us astray. Of course, he's taught many brilliant things, but this is one thing I think he kind of got us in trouble. Operational effectiveness and strategy are two different, are apples and oranges. They're two different categories. You need a strategy for operational excellence, just as you need a strategy for inventing a new product or
positioning your company
in a new region. You name it. The two are not in the same category of thought. Operational excellence. So what I think the question really could be phrased as, how do you balance operational effectiveness of what you have now versus entering new things or trying to create new things? Now, that's a balance that's worth discussing, and you need a strategy to find that balance. So I think the big message here is we got to stop talking about operational effectiveness and strategy being opposites of the same category.
That's why I like that definition of strategy so much, that it's about the response to the challenges, keeping you from or the how to bust the bottleneck to achieve your ambition, because it works in every aspect of business and life and in all kind of different levels in the organization, right? So I think that's a big problem we have with usual definitions of strategy, that for every area where you try to apply it, you need to tweak it somehow because it's not valid, right? It's just valid in one domain and not in another one.
This is really something I think that would help the whole strategy world if we could see that strategy can't be defined for any particular endeavor. It has to work for any aspiration that you choose. Of course, the specifics are different, but not the overall concept that you need policy for attacking what's in the way.
Talking about operational excellence, and I guess some people could also mistake that for tactics, and you talk about strategy and tactics, and you have a very clear definition for what is one and what is the other in the book. Can you just talk a little bit about that, maybe?
Yes. So the difference between strategy and tactics is often put in terms of things like strategy is the what and tactics are the how, or strategy is for long term and tactics are for short term, and so forth. But the this model of strategy, this model of innovation and strategy, kind of gives a different view that tactics are rules also. And this is actually very intuitive to people. A tactical policy, right, is a rule. Um, uh, but the difference between a tactic and a strategy is the scope to which the rule applies. And so you might have, let's go back to example of growing in a new region, right? And you have an overall strategy of, let's say a case where the problem is you have to let go of some of your existing customer base that has matured to finance your movement into the new space. Not only finance it financially, but mind space, right? And so forth. The way to attack this strategy choice might be to create differential management policy where you segment customers or you segment your products and you define which segments can get which resources. You know, we're only going to give this segment of customers 4 days lead time on delivery and special packaging and center cuts on quality, whatever it might be. But all these guys over here, we're going to let them go and only give them opportunistic sales, for example, or they have to take what we're willing to give them type thing, and everything in between. Each one of those differential management rules is a tactical rule. It only applies to a small part of the organization. For example, it would apply to what resources in the factory a given segment is allowed to call on.
Yeah.
Those are tactical rules.
Okay.
But they're not a holistic rule that covers the entire organization. So the difference between tactics and strategy is scope. They're both rules. And if you want to look at it there in chapter 6, where I go into this, it's very interesting. Mao Zedong in the 20s and 30s did some writing on strategy that gave this definition a long time ago. And there was one of the analysis of his work by a military writer coined what he was teaching tacticization, when people allowed the small scope to determine the big scope. It's very interesting. There's some references there you can go look at.
But how, just to clarify, so what would that mean in terms of, so you could say, I mean, we have a business level strategy, and then we need a department or a functional strategy. Let's say product development needs a strategy that's aligned to the overall strategy. But that would still be a strategy, or would that be tactical because it's kind of limited to the department?
No, former. And this is chapter 7. And again, not a concept that is completely new. The idea of nested systems, nested strategies. But my argument is every system in a company and you choose them for convenience, has to have its own strategy. And the relationship between you use the example of, say, a product manager, right? Within an overall strategy. The product manager strategy and strategic plan is constrained by the overall CEO strategy.
Right.
But it's not that the CEO has a strategy and everybody else's tactics.
Right.
No.
So then what, just trying to wrap my head around it. So if you say, so we have a product management, a product development strategy, what would be an example of a tactic then within the product development function or department? Is it like,
let's use it. Let's go with that example again. So we're going into a new region, and let's say that the bottleneck for the CEO turned out to be product line. Needs to be it's too high priced and too much performance.
Yep.
So the CEO gives the product people the responsibility to figure out how to create a product that makes sense for this new region with the constraints that you can't contaminate what's going on in your existing regions, right? Now, the product manager, call it the product manager,
Right.
could be R&D, whoever it is.
Whatever.
Now they have an objective. They need to create a new product, but they, what's the bottleneck? What if the bottleneck is it's very hard to take cost out of the product, and that if you're going to sell it for a lower price, you're actually just going to kill margins?
Yeah.
What if the problem is it is very hard to design a new product? What if the problem is sourcing? I don't know. Name it. They have to decide which kind of strategy to attack these problems. What would a tactic be? A tactic might be how to engage suppliers, how to run experiments on whether they can defeature a product and take cost out. Do they do it in the lab? Do they get time on the factory line to experiment with it? These would be their own tactics. By the way, the CEO's got tactics too, don't they?
Right. Right.
The CEO has tactics around how to deal with Wall Street, how to deal with the monthly cadence of the organization, and how to manage their own people. Countless tactics. Every part of a company, every system, whether it's a function or a business hierarchy, has their own strategic framework with strategy, tactics, diagnosis, and plans, and so on.
But tactics is not just actions; it's the rules that govern these actions.
It is the rule. It's
Right.
the policy. Should we, what's our policy about going out and getting help on a new product development? Or running our own experiments, or running at a factory. Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So we are already close to the end. I mean, it was a very interesting conversation. I guess we could go on for a couple of hours, so maybe we repeat it at some time. I was interested in maybe a last question from my side, and then we'll see where I still have some time for questions from the audience. I mean, lots of people talking about going into a recession and times of uncertainty with multiple wars now and things like that. What is your take on how emergent strategy can, or that approach to strategy, your approach to strategy, can help with that kind of environment?
I think the essential feature of the strategy practice that I present in part 2 of the book, part 1 is the theory, part 2 is the practice, is the integration of scenarios into the strategy matrix and strategy design process. And I kind of sense that scenarios are used in an either-or kind of situation. Either we're going to do this kind of pie-in-the-sky, long-term scenario kind of thing, planning, or we're not going to do them at all. And what I promote is to use scenarios no matter what, and that scenarios are the descriptions of the environment you're going to be working and living in as you start walking down the road.
Right.
And of course, that environment can be, as you mentioned, worldwide events and conditions, interest rates. How many people had in their scenarios interest rates going where they did in the last year after years of free money, right? They can be competitors. They can be regulatory. They can be public opinion. I recommend not including in your scenarios your own outcomes, meaning the scenario of whether a product is successful or not. Use assessments for that instead. But I think the integration of scenarios has been, it's not brought into strategy planning in a integrated enough way. And I think that's really the place to go when you have this kind of worldwide uncertainty. But I want to add another thing is I think people equate turbulence with uncertainty.
Right.
And this is not true. There's not, we get excited and anxiety ridden during times of turbulence, but that doesn't mean the future is less certain. In fact, I argue that the future is usually more uncertain when things are quiet because you don't know that you're about to go over a waterfall.
Yeah.
Now, once you start going over the waterfall, you kind of know what's going to happen. It's before the waterfall, before you see it. We get lulled into the belief that uncertainty and turbulence are equivalent.
Yeah. So let's say you have these scenarios. What does that then mean for your strategy? Do you kind of look at bottlenecks for all of these, or how do you then deal with these scenarios?
No, the process is to say that every strategy is at the mercy of all future scenarios, of all environmental scenarios. That doesn't mean you have to consider them all. It doesn't mean you have to design for them all. And the bottleneck could be your uncertainty about a future scenario.
And
For
the
example,
strategy is how to deal with that. Yeah.
what if the bottleneck is that you have a product in regulatory evaluation, and you think it's a 50-50 chance whether or not
Yeah.
you'll get approved? Well, your strategy has to accept that. One real danger, besides equating turbulence and uncertainty, is the idea that each scenario gets its own strategy. And of course, this is defeating the entire concept of scenarios. So say you have a scenario of low interest rates and high interest rates. And you say, oh, well, we'll have one strategy for high interest rates and one for low interest rates. But this is absurd. You have to choose one strategy that's at the mercy of both those possible futures.
Right. So that's making the choice.
You don't get to choose your strategy after you find out what the future was.
Yeah.
You have to
That
do
would be easier.
So I spend a lot of time on scenarios in part 2, and also online where I lay out methods. I don't advise using the famous 2x2 matrices too much, and but you can find it in there.
Cool. Yeah. So just gonna grab the link here and share it again with all the listeners. So if you want to get all through these resources and learn more about the book, and you share a lot of stuff also online and further download, so please have a look at that. So I think time is up. We've got a minute left. So just a final word, maybe how can CEOs make better strategy? What would be if you just had one tip to give?
I think I would go back to what we said earlier. Get rid of the lists.
Right.
And start with the strategy bottleneck aspiration triad.
Yeah, I like to get rid of the lists and really try to figure out what is the one priority and the biggest bottleneck that you need to address first before you go to the next ones.
Internalize what's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Peter. There are a lot more questions on the LinkedIn page, so maybe you and I can go afterwards through those, and if you feel like you can answer some or have some something valuable to share with the audience, please do that offline. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Thanks for your participation and your questions. If you like this kind of thing, the next one is going to come up actually next week. I'm going to do one on doing a better strategy offsite. So I'm not a big fan to reducing strategy to an offsite, but I know that many companies do them. So let's talk about, if you have to do them, how you can actually do them in a better kind of way. So if you're interested in that, you can find the link also on LinkedIn and just register for that there. And again, if you're interested in the book and Peter's work, then don't hesitate to head over to emergentapproach.com, where you can learn more about these things. And if you have any more questions, just keep them coming on LinkedIn. Well, Peter, thanks again for joining us today. And yeah, look forward to talking to you very soon again.
Thanks, Mark. It was fun.
Thank you. Bye.